Well, welcome back to another episode of the Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs podcast. I'm your host and podcast strategist, Andria Singletary. Okay, today's interview is such a good one. I sat down to chat with Keshia Joachim, who is an attorney and has over 15 years of legal experience. She now runs K&A Law Group, a boutique firm focused on trademark, copyright, business, and immigration law. I had to have her on the podcast to talk about the legal side of podcasting because I feel like this is something that we often kind of skip over as, business owners starting a podcast and everything. And so I kind of wanted to dive into, the other aspects of, legally protecting your podcast. A lot of times we think that having a guest release form is all we actually need to protect our podcast, but it's not. And so in this episode, Keshia is sharing so many great insights and tips to ensure your podcast is protected. So if you have a podcast or if you're thinking about starting one, pull up a chair and grab a notebook and pen so you can learn exactly what you need to do to protect your intellectual property. All right, let's jump into today's episode. All right, today on Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs, I'm sitting down to chat with Keshia Joachim, and we're talking all about the legal side of podcasting. I'm really excited about this because I feel like as podcasters, we really do need to protect our work. And so Keshia is going to get us all together today and tell us what we need to do to protect our podcast. So Keshia, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Andrea. It's a pleasure.
No worries. Okay, so let's start with I know there's a lot that goes into starting and maintaining a podcast, but what legal protections do podcasters often overlook when starting and growing their shows?
Yeah, so I'd say one main thing that they overlook is that they forget they are a brand. And when you are a brand, you have to be sure that you protect that brand. So one of the main things I would say is that, they'll start recording, they'll have guests, and they do not file a trademark. A trademark will give you protection in all 50 states. It protects your business name, your logo, your slogan, which are all things that are important, especially in the day and age that we live in. So that's one thing I'd say that they often overlook is, hey, I need a trademark for this podcast. Something else I would say that's very important is that copyright protection. You're creating these sound recordings, you may have show notes, and so forth. And a lot of times, yes, once you create something, you do have copyright protection. However, if you want to bring a copyright infringement claim against someone if they try to steal your work, the way you're able to bring that claim is when you file with the Copyright Office. So a lot of times people overlook that as well.
Oh, wow. I love how you brought up that a lot of times when people start their podcast, they don't think of it as it being part of their brand. And
Yeah.
it's so true. I know something I see a lot of times with people who start a podcast, they just look at it as this fun, creative outlet. So they're not really looking at the bigger picture and they're literally creating this body of work that does need to be protected and everything. So yeah, those are definitely things that we need to consider. Another question I have is, does a podcaster need an LLC or any specific business structure to start a podcast? So I know for me,
Yeah.
my podcast, I use it as kind of an extension of my business.
Okay.
So I know it's kind of different if somebody is a business owner leveraging the platform to grow their business. But someone who maybe they're not necessarily using it in that way, they're, starting it, like you said, as part of a brand or something like that. Do they need to file for that LLC or create some type of business structure for it?
Yeah. So, not necessarily. You do not need an LLC to start a podcast. However, again, as you're building this brand, you have to think, risks that can come into play. Different people that you may have on there, advice that you are sharing. You want to be sure that you lower the risk of liability. And through that, it would be best if you filed for an LLC, which LLC stands for a limited liability company. So if someone were to file a lawsuit against you, they're not coming after your personal assets. They basically would be filing the lawsuit against your business. So that's why, I do advise people eventually you should get an LLC. If you want to start off, yeah, you're starting off as a hobby, but again, you don't know how this can take off. A lot of times I'll speak to podcasters like, yeah, I just, me and my friends had some thoughts we just wanted to share. So we decided to, do this as a hobby, and then it picks up. So it's best that you are able to set the foundation early on instead of later on. I always say to people, be proactive instead of reactive.
That is so true. And it's right. Like people really don't know what can happen with the show they create and different things like that. They think they're just again creating something for fun or like a hobby and then it blows up. So just getting ahead of that is smart. I know we talked a little bit about trademarks already, but when should a podcaster start thinking about trademarking their podcast name? And why does timing matter?
Yeah. So I would say you should podcast your name early on. Timing is very important. Sometimes someone can name their podcast something and not even realize that maybe someone already has the trademark registered for that. And then you're putting yourself in hot water because you're saying, hey, I love this name. I threw it on the podcast. I did no search. And then someone comes to you and they could be filing a trademark infringement lawsuit against you. So it's important that you search the name first. I always let people know, search the name. You can do it yourself. You don't need an attorney to search the name. You can go on the USPTO.gov website, and it is a section that says trademark search. Quickly put the name in and see if the name is available. That's one thing. Another thing I would say is that you can think of this creative name. Maybe no one else has it. And you have your podcast, you're promoting it online. Someone's like, oh, this is a catchy name. I should go ahead and take that name and file a trademark application for that name. Now you may have to spend, hundreds and rebranding and, going back and forth with this person because now this person owns your name. So it's so important, as you're thinking about this podcast, that you're also thinking about the legal side of it and making sure that you file for a trademark so you don't have to deal with any issues going forward.
Yeah, that's one thing I tell my clients, like, before they choose a name, go search to make sure it's not
Yes,
already trademarked. I
yes,
also tell them to, like, search the podcast listening apps because maybe it's not trademarked yet, but you don't wanna
mm,
choose a name that someone is already using, because,
exactly.
like, when people go to search that name, well, now there's 2 podcasts coming up for that name and everything. So I agree, like, doing that research first before you create the cover art, launch the podcast and all of
Yeah.
that, because it is a hassle to have to go and change everything and whatnot. So yeah, definitely doing that research first and going ahead, like if you know that this is the name that you want to for sure go with, go ahead and getting it trademarked just to protect you and your brand and everything.
Yeah, it's very important. I let people know all the time, like, it's free 99, just going on the USPTO
Yeah.
website. And, just doing that quick search, just be sure that you are, not causing any issues going forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So when it comes to like people playing music on their podcast or even like reading quotes from books and articles, is this something that they can legally do? Are there best practices around this?
Yes, and definitely. I'd love to share some insight in regards to that because I feel like it is common. So when it comes to music, music is a bit layered because for the most part, there's two parts to a song. It's like the composition and the recording. So with that, someone owns that and usually need a license to use someone's music. Whether you are using, there's some sites that are free royalty sites where basically you can go on and you purchase a license and you're able to use that person's recording. Or if depending on who the, artist is, label is, if it's someone that you can actually contact and say, I want to use this on your podcast, you're able to do that as well, as long as you have permission. However, you definitely do not want to use someone's work without having some type of permission from them when it comes to music, because again, it can get a little bit complex. And some people can think, well, songs are played on the radio. How does that work? Isn't it kind of similar to podcasts when it's not the same? Because usually with those radio stations, they have a license to use those. They usually will have a publishing license or a master license where they're able to play it on the radio with different companies such as BMI or ASCAP, would basically protect artists and labels and their work. So that's in regards to music. In regards to books, there is something called the fair use doctrine. And with the fair use doctrine, it basically allows you to use a snippet of someone, like, say, for instance, if you want to read a quote or so forth, you are able to do that as long as you are providing some commentary in regards to what you're sharing, or you are educating, someone in regards to whatever you're sharing, or there's satire. And with that, you're also able to use like a small clip. So you can't say, for instance, if, there's let's say, for instance, there's like a recording you want to use of someone on your podcast, something hot topics, and you're using the whole, 3-minute recording. You have to be careful because with the fair use doctrine, one thing that they say that courts will look at is how much of, whatever you were commenting on, how much of it are you using? Are you using just a snippet of it, or are you using the whole thing? So think about that in regards to books as well. Are you just reading a whole quote, or are you reading, majority of the book on your podcast? So something to think about. So I'd say, in regards to how to use these things on your podcast, be more on the cautious side. If you're able to create your own recording intro, or if you do want to use someone, make sure you get a license. Or if you are using something, make sure it's a small snippet and you're providing some type of education or commentary in regards to that.
Yeah, that's so good. When it comes to like the intro and outro music for podcasts, I always send my clients to it's called Audio Jungle. And they have the royalty free music where you purchase the license and you're able to like utilize that music and everything. And there's like a lot of different websites for that. And then there are even like you can hire someone to create original music for you. So you do have a lot of different options, but you wanna make sure that it's, like, that royalty-free music or like you said, you get permission and get it in writing too,
Yes,
just to
of course.
cover you legally and everything. But I love what you shared about, like, when it comes to, like, reading quotes from, like, books and articles, because I was always curious about that for, like, podcasts where they really focus on, like, discussing different books and different
Yes,
things like that, but it makes sense if, like, it's primarily, like, you're commenting on certain aspects of the book and different things, that makes sense. Because I did worry about, like, what if somebody is reading too much of the book and it's like, that's gonna hurt the author, right? Like,
yes,
now they
yes.
don't even have to go out and buy the book and
Searches.
everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
that's really good. I'm glad we were able to discuss that because, like I said, I see especially, like, more and more podcasts where they're having, these different conversations on different hot topics, so, like, different books and articles and different things like that, but that's good to know, like, that's the best way to navigate those things.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's get into like guest interviews. So like when it comes to guest interviews and like sharing clips and even to like the use of AI tools, like all of these things are becoming more common. What legal risks should podcasters be aware of?
Yeah. So when it comes to AI, as we noticed, AI is taking over. There's some benefits with AI as far as, it helping being more efficient, if you're using it within your business, your work. But then we've also seen issues with AI where people are taking people's likeness and reformatting it. So it's becoming, yeah, I would say, a big issue, especially within the legal world, as they're still trying to navigate, okay, how do we deal with this new technology and be sure that people are legally protected? So, and particularly when it comes to podcasts, if you as, this is your podcast, you own the podcast. And a lot of times, I know in your instance, you have people sign a, guest release form. And in that information, in your contract, you're sharing like, okay, I own the rights to this. So with that, if you wanted to use AI to edit a clip of a person, as long as you're not straying away from what the person said completely, you are allowed to do that. And that's why it's important to have contracts in place as well. However, say for instance, if you put out a clip from your podcast, you put it on YouTube or maybe you put it on Instagram, now somebody else, a third party, takes this clip and they use AI to basically completely transform the clip that you put out, and the person, who you record, they're like, hey, this is not what I stated in the podcast interview. How is this out? You can take legal recourse over the person who took this clip and transformed it. Because again, you are the copyright owner. And yes, you do have as you do have the rights to edit, but you also have to be sure that, what you're editing is still within the frame of what the person said. But then also if someone else tries to take your work and completely transform it, you can file a suit against them for copyright infringement.
That's good. And I didn't even really think about that, especially like you said, with the rise of AI and everything, because we
Yeah.
do see a lot of that where people are taking original content and distorting it and different things like that. So yeah, definitely have to be careful of that. I personally don't do video with my podcast, so
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have to worry about that. But it's a good thing to be mindful of if you are
Yeah.
someone who is sharing clips or, having your videos uploaded to YouTube and different things like that. Just knowing how you can protect yourself, but also protect your guest when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's important.
It is. Okay, so I know you saw my guest release form, but I don't wanna talk about mine, but what
That's
things should be included in
yeah.
a podcast guest release form?
Yeah, so of course, when it comes to any contract, you have to be sure that you are protected as a business owner. And there are, you know, particular I'd say there's particular language that should be within that contract, so you won't have any issues, and also to make sure whoever you're gonna have on your podcast, they are gonna align with it, because you can't have something that's also over the top, and the person's like, "Okay, I'm not want to be on your podcast for this." So certain things should be the forced consent to record. That's important. Make sure you have the person's permission that you can record them, consent to use their name, their voice, their image, and their likeness. Right to edit. As a podcaster, of course, I know you have to edit the content before you put it out. Also, right to create derivative works. So if you are going to be taking a piece of the recording and, create a little snippet of the video and post that out, that's basically you creating a derivative work of that, or maybe you're adding onto it, you're kind of manipulating it a bit. You should have the right to that as well. Also, worldwide use, perpetual use. If, once you record something, for the most part, it's going to be here. We see with the World Wide Web, people are able to take things from several years ago. So it's good that you include that within your contract, so you are continually able to use that content that you created. Something else I would say is commercial use. If you want to use this recording, whatever recording, for commercial purposes, you should have that within your guest release form as well. Something else is waiver of approval, that you don't need to, anytime that you're going to put something else, that you need approval from the person that you recorded. So you should include a waiver inside the consent form as well. The last thing I would say, release of liability. You want to be sure that you're protected. You don't want anyone trying to come after you, based off of recording to kind of, so make sure you have that in place. I'd say these are like the key things to make sure that you have in place, because again, as you are a podcast owner, you want to be sure that you have content that you've created and that you're able to distribute it out and be able to share it on different platforms. But you also want to be sure that you're protecting yourself from any liability issues that could arise.
That's good. I have a follow-up question. So I previously worked with a client who she recorded the interview, and as I was going in and editing it, the person said some things that were borderline racist and everything, so we had a discussion about not releasing the episode, and we
Mhm.
ended up not releasing it, but I was curious, like, should podcasters have something included in the release form stating that, they may choose not to release the episode? Like, how can they navigate that? And I'm not even necessarily sure if it's a legal issue, but I'm
Yeah,
curious,
no,
like, your thoughts on that.
no, that's actually that's really important. And I think, especially the day and age that we live in, I think there should be some type of, a sentence or two in regards to that. If you state something that I feel, may give rise to such incite or incite violence or whatever it may be, because in that situation, depending on what she said, that may have incited some violence. We don't know where it could have gone in this day and age. So I do believe you have the right as a podcast owner to have some type of language within your release form to say, you know, if, for such reason, I find that the contents that were mentioned during this podcast could again incite violence or give rise to X, Y, and Z, I have the right to not include that portion, that segment, or not to release the recording. So that actually is a really good follow-up question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like because you don't know, like you think you know people going into the
Yeah,
interview, you research
right.
them and stuff like that, but then
Exactly.
sometimes you get out of the interview and people start saying
Yeah.
crazy stuff and everything. So, yeah, I feel like that's a great way to kind of protect yourself, especially if you're someone who's not necessarily having that direct conversation, like comfortable having that direct conversation with the person about it and everything. I think having that included too, that just, protects you legally and different things like that. And I'm curious to your thoughts. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to podcast guest release forms, I know that there are lawyers who have like different templates that they sell and different
Yeah.
things like that. Do you think it's better for someone to go the template route, like purchasing a template, or actually working one on one with the lawyer to have one created specifically for their podcast?
Yeah. So for me, because I work with a lot of small business owners, so I understand being cost effective. So if you are able to purchase a template, of course, I would say make sure you purchase it from a lawyer. Because if you're purchasing it from a lawyer, again, you're going to have the legal language that you need within that template. And lawyers, we have a liability, we have a duty where we can't just be putting out anything. Like, we have to make
Mhm.
sure we use our due diligence because our license is on the line. Of course, there's going to be, a disclaimer within that template that say, hey, if you have any additional questions, you may want to reach out to an attorney within your state. But I do believe, if you go the template route, make sure you purchase from a lawyer. But if you have extra money to send, if you work with a lawyer directly, of course, you're going to have that contract tailored specifically to you and what you need in it. Because with templates, as you know, they're a little bit more general. If you want, as you had the follow-up question, if I want to take out, a portion, you know, of a recording, or if I don't want to release a recording, um, if you have an attorney, you can speak to them about that, and they can you can bounce ideas off of them, and then they'll share their legal insight on what they think would be best for you in your business.
Okay. Do you, offer templates or like, I know
Yeah,
we're
so
gonna get to talking about your
yes, no,
services and
no,
stuff, but I was
definitely.
just
So,
curious.
yeah, so I'm actually in the process right now. I do have a contract shop on my website, which is www.k&alawgroup.com. I know, like you said, towards the end we'll share some more. And I am looking to add a lot more contracts, contract templates, excuse me, on my website so people are able to purchase again because I work with a lot of small business owners and they want to be cost effective. So sometimes they may not have the money to pay my hourly fee. But at least if they're able to get a template in place, at least have something. I'm a big proponent on
Yeah.
please do something. Even some clients are like, I don't have the money, for a trademark attorney. There's resources out there. I have, tons of resources, videos up of how you can file a trademark on your own. Just please do something to be sure that you
Mhm.
are protected.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll talk about that some more in a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about like, protecting ourselves from like liability issues and stuff, but do podcasters need professional liability insurance, like especially if they're giving advice in areas like business, health, or finance?
Yeah, so I'd say if you are giving advice in regards to those areas, even in law as well, because that's another area where there can be a great risk of liability. Um, of course, I would say disclaimer. Make sure beforehand you let people know that I am not a medical professional, I'm not an attorney, or so forth. Or even for myself, like although I'm sharing this information, I am not anyone's attorney. There's no client attorney privilege right now. This is information I'm sharing is just educational purposes. It's not legal advice as well. So always make sure to give a disclaimer. And whoever you're having on your show, they may want to give a disclaimer as well, because that's very important because that type of information that you're putting out there, you don't want someone to say, well, I listened to this podcast and they told me to do X, Y, and Z. They told me to take this, medication. Like, you make
Mm.
sure that you are protected, so just make sure you always give a disclaimer, either the beginning. I would say it's better to do it in the beginning of the recording instead of the end if you want to make sure you cover all bases, the beginning and the ending. And also, whoever the guest is that you're having on there, they should have some type of liability insurance, especially if they're in this, different professions such as law, such as the
Mm.
health field. They should have some type of protection.
Okay. Yeah, it can be a very tricky when it comes to those things. So, like, definitely having that disclaimer. And I even say, too, like, having it in writing. So, like, for specific episodes, like, if you're having a health professional on or you're, borderline moving into that territory of like advice and everything, have that disclaimer written too in your episode description just to cover you and everything like that. Because people may like I don't know, sometimes people's listening is not the best, so they'll just take for a fact when you're just giving advice, like,
Yes.
so just making those disclaimers and different things to protect yourself, legally is so important.
Yes, absolutely. No, I agree with that. Yes, have it in writing.
Yeah. Okay, well, this was such a good conversation, Keisha. I appreciate you just sharing so much with us about, the legal aspects of podcasting and everything. But before we wrap up, please share where listeners can connect with you and learn more about working with you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It truly has been a pleasure. I love sharing this advice. It's one of the reasons why I got into the legal field and love to help small business owners, podcasters, because again, a lot of times people don't know. They just don't know. They have a passion for something. They think, let me just start it and don't think about the legal side of things. So it
Mhm.
truly has been a pleasure today. So everyone can actually go on my website, www.kanalawgroup.com. It's also at KNA Law Group on Instagram. I'm on Facebook at KNA Law Group. I'm also on TikTok. I am also on Threads, which I love. It's like my new favorite
Yeah,
social
that's where we
platform.
connected, actually.
Exactly. Connected on there. So KNA Law Group on there all across the board. My phone number is 703-493-0169 if people do want to reach out to me. I am in Northern Virginia, but I'm able to assist clients in all 50 states.
Oh,
So yeah,
wow.
worldwide. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I will make sure to link all of your information in the show notes. But thank you so much again. This was such a good conversation.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No problem.